Hello everyone, welcome to another Fast Tracks webinar. Today we are covering cycle counts. Cycle counts is the primary way you're going to keep track of your inventory to make sure that the values equal what they're supposed to give you a chance to correct for any loss or mistakes that you may suspect, and to give your employees something to do to make sure that their numbers are accurate. We're going to start in Director. The first step to a cycle count is a definition. The benefit of a cycle count over a spot check is that it uses a definition which defines a specific list of items. Once you have established a definition, when you start a new cycle count, using that definition, it's going to get a snapshot of those items that meet that criteria. In Director, we're going to inventory, and then definitions. And you see I have several definitions here already. I have found that it is easiest to keep your store up to date if you create many small definitions to cover the wide variety of items rather than one full store definition that takes your team an entire day or an entire weekend to complete. Smaller definitions would allow your employees to do it during their shift if it's a small enough section without interrupting their day. We are going to create a new definition. One example of a very good use for smaller definitions is when you have an area that you specifically want to pay closer attention to. So for that purpose, I have created a couple of report group descriptions for some of my items. Some of my report group 2 in my database includes cooler 1 for the cooler near the door where I think there's a lot of high traffic and risk, counter snacks for the snacks literally on the counter. And today we're going to use Black and Mild Easy Reach Shelf, which is a middle shelf that can be reached from the other side of the counter in case there's a situation where an employee isn't paying close attention and someone can reach over. So I have added all of my Black and Mild on that Easy Reach shelf to have that as their report group 2 status, and that can be set in the tree information on the individual items in Pricebook item details. Once that has been set on each of those items, anytime you have a report or cycle count that you want to filter by that report group, it'll give you exactly that list of items that includes this exact text in their field called report group 2. So I'm going to make that a definition, and I'm going to call it Black and Mild Shelf. And I'm going to hit save. This adds a definition to my list called Black and Mild Shelf. The next step can be done either in Director or on the handheld. For today's purposes, we're going to use Director. That step is to create a new cycle count. Because I've just added this definition, I'm going to reload my inventory module by clicking on Inventory again, and then go to Inventory, and we're in cycle counts. This adds the brand new definition to my drop-down list at the bottom of definitions. I'm going to select Black and Mild Shelf as my definition, and I'm going to hit Start to start a new cycle count. Start new count, yes. If this were done on the handheld, you would do the same thing. You would log into your inventory module on the handheld. You would log in with your employee number. You would select cycle count, and you would select this as your definition for a new count. We're going to open the worksheet in Director to see what the list of items look like. In my normal procedure, if I were at a store, I would not open this worksheet in Director until after I had counted with my handheld. Once you've counted with your handheld, you can come into Director and open this worksheet of the cycle count, and you will see an accurate floor count or backroom count for what has been scanned and counted in our definition. As you can see, we have 10 items, and these are parent-child items, which means we have both the parent unit and the corresponding subunit on this cycle count. Anytime you are counting an item that has purchase units and subunits, like cigarettes, beer that you sell both by the case and by the can with separate UPCs, these individually wrapped cigars that you can sell by the single sticks or by the box, any place you have subunits and purchase units, you'll want to include both of those on your cycle count. And the purpose of that is for tracking breakdowns correctly. One of the benefits of our cycle count software is that it will keep a timestamp of when you scanned the item, and it also keeps a timestamp of any sales that occur on the item, so that the software can use its best judgment for whether you sold before or after you counted that item if sales happened during your cycle count. If a breakdown happens during your cycle count, say you have 0 of this original natural wrap single on hand and someone sells one, it will take one of the boxes out of inventory and add the appropriate linked number of singles. If that breakdown happens during your cycle count, you want to have both of those items on the cycle count so that it will reflect it correctly for both items. All right, so for this cycle count, we have both 5 purchase units and 5 subunits on our cycle count. On the handheld, if you want more than one person to be able to join the cycle count at the same time, that's very easy. You have one person create the new cycle count, just like normal, and then you have each additional person on a separate handheld log in to the inventory module and then resume count to resume that same brand new cycle count with the first person. That puts all of them on the same count, which means all of their scans and all of their quantities put in all go to the same list and show up on the same one worksheet when you open it in Director. I know some of our customers use 2, 3, or 4 handhelds at a time when they inventory stores. And even then, I still recommend doing sections and not full store. As they complete each section, someone who is in charge of reviewing would open the worksheet just like this in Director and review, starting with variance count. All right, we're going to skip ahead and we're going to talk about what happens after you have counted on your handheld and you open this worksheet in Director. If you have already opened the worksheet like we did here today, and then you started counting with your handheld, you're going to want to close and reopen the worksheet. This refreshes your counted quantities from what's happened on the handheld since the last time you opened the worksheet. You can also refresh for your quantity sold and your adjusted snapshot count using this refresh quantity sold button, and we're going to get back to that in just a minute. Let's talk about each of the fields on this cycle count worksheet. On the far left, we see the UPC numbers, and by default, your cycle count is going to be ordered by UPC number. Next, we see the description of each of those items. The third column, counted, tells us if a value has been entered for that UPC number at any time during the cycle count. The next column, scanned, tells us if that value was entered from the handheld. While you are counting, you have an option of counting in backroom mode or in floor mode. The benefit of backroom mode is that it allows you to mark those items as being in a section that is not being sold from. If you count something in backroom mode, the software is going to be smart enough to know that you're not selling out of that pile. So it will not adjust any backroom counts based on sales. You want to reserve this for overstock areas, warehouse areas, literal backrooms, places where you don't sell inventory out of that area. Floor count. If you are in floor mode, which is probably what you're going to be in for the majority of your cycle counts, those show up in this column when you open the worksheet. Those are also adjusted for sales. If you count from a floor count and you have 5 of an item on the shelf, and then you sell one, you're going to see the quantity sold here when you open your worksheet as 1, and you're going to see your total count also updated to 4, reflecting that one was sold after your floor count of 5. User adjust count. This is the column that is in white when you open the worksheet. That is where you will do any modifications, edits, repairs to your count once you open it in Director. User adjust count reflects that these numbers were entered manually in the worksheet rather than from the handheld. A number entered into the user adjust count does not flag as counted or scanned. The total count is the sum of your backroom count, floor count, and user adjust count. Your total count is what you're looking for, and that's what you're going to compare to your snapshot quantity and your adjusted snapshot quantity. If your snapshot quantity and your total count don't match, like in the case of this natural wrap single, this is when you would want to go back and check based on your variance and then enter a user adjust. If you need to make your total count lower, you don't enter the new number into your user adjust. You enter a negative value to adjust that count to the new count. Quantity sold is going to update when you open the worksheet, and will also update when you press this refresh quantity sold button. As I mentioned at the beginning, this takes into account a time record of when you counted it versus when you sold it. If you sold an item and then you counted it, it will take that into consideration for determining your adjusted total count and your variance. Breakdown quantity. This is why we do subunits and purchase units on the same cycle counts. The breakdown quantity is going to show you if a breakdown occurred. If one single was sold where you had 0 on the shelf, you will see a breakdown quantity of 10 added to the single. You will see a breakdown quantity of -1 added to the parent item, the purchase unit. Your adjusted total count is your total count adjusted for quantity sold and breakdowns that occurred after you counted. If the quantity sold or breakdown occurred before you counted, then your total count is going to match your adjusted total count. It will not adjust your total count for sales and breakdowns that occurred before you counted the item. Snapshot quantity. Snapshot quantity is how many the system saw as on hand for each of those items at the moment that you started the cycle count using that definition. Adjusted snapshot count is the snapshot count adjusted for quantity sold. Variance count. This variance column is, in a lot of people's opinion, the most important. I've talked to many people that open the worksheet and immediately click on variance count to resort their worksheet by that column. This puts all your big numbers on the top. If you click once, it puts all your negative numbers on the top. If you click again, it puts all your big positive numbers on the top. This gives you a way to immediately see your problem items, something that may have been skipped, something that maybe had a 6-digit UPC number scanned in as a floor count instead of a quantity typed, creating a huge variance. Those will show up immediately if you sort by this column. Variance dollars is literally that. It shows you your cost dollar amount for that variance. In this case, we've counted 0 of this single unit. And based on cost, that gives us a variance count of -21 from what inventory was expecting. And the dollar amount value of that cost is $17.65. All of your variance dollar amounts, positive and negative, roll up into this total variance that we see at the top of the screen. This also shows you the total number of variance items, the total number of items on the worksheet, and the total number that were uncounted. In this case, we've only entered a user adjust count for 2 items so far. That shows us that we have 8 uncounted items on this cycle count. Besides sorting by variance count, we also have filter options on the top left. The default is all items. If you do a full store cycle count, this is going to be a very lengthy list. You can filter instead to only your counted items. That shows us only the items where we've entered an amount. Only your uncounted items. We can use uncounted items and the variance count column to sort to quickly find stuff that we may have missed. Only items with a variance. If your only concern is the items where your inventory was not correct, this is the quick reference way of finding just those items. You would filter by only items with a variance. And last, we have a checkbox that turns on roll-up view for our worksheet. If we turn on roll-up view, we immediately see a lot of changes. We have 3 columns for the parent UPC, and we have 3 columns for the child UPC rolled up onto the same line. This allows us to see the parent-child relationships immediately, to see what breakdowns or if someone, say, broke a box of or a carton of cigarettes apart on the shelf during the cycle count, we'll be able to see that at a glance. You can see that the parent quantity and the child quantity with their expected quantities have a link quantity, where the parent quantity times whatever that link number is added to the child quantity to give you your total link quantity. I'm sorry. Link quantity is how many are actually linked. They are added together to give you your total roll-up quantity. In this case, for example, we're seeing a roll-up quantity of 0.1333 for this single because we have a 2 out of 15 counted. So if you look at roll-up quantity in terms of the purchase unit, we have a fraction of one purchase unit, a fraction of one box. That's what this roll-up fraction represents, this decimal. Our total expected quantity is a decimal representation of what we were supposed to have. So out of 21 child units and 0 purchase units of this item, we counted none. Our roll-up quantity is 0. Our total expected quantity was 0.84 boxes, which is 21 out of 25 boxes, or 21 out of 25 singles. We see our parent variance, and we see our child variance. So in the case of someone breaking down a carton of cigarettes on the shelf during the count, you would see a parent variance typically of -1 and a child variance of 10, which would reflect a total variance of 0. That's the number. That's the target number that you're looking for when you're doing the cycle count review. The roll-up view allows you to quickly cancel out and look at just your total variance, so that the parent variance and child variance cancels each other out to give you a total variance of 0. We're going to go back to the normal view. And let's say because of this large variance, I send someone out to count those again. And I realize that we completely missed that. It was on the wrong shelf or something. And we do, in fact, have 21. I can add a user adjust count of 21 to this column. Because we are sorted by variance count, that moves it to the bottom. Bear in mind how you're sorting, because that will make your items move around. If we go back to sorting by UPC number, and we go back to viewing all items, then we see it back in its original place, third in our list, and we see that our total count is now 21. Our snapshot and adjusted snapshot is also 21. That gives us a variance count of 0. Our variance dollar amount for 0 is $0, and our total variance has now dropped to $6.29. When you see a number in parentheses, if it wasn't clear already, that represents a negative number. At the bottom of our cycle count worksheet, we have a button called Set Uncounted to Expected Quantity. The useful thing about this button is when you are using a cycle count, but you're only counting a small number of items, you're using a cycle count in place of a spot check. If you have counted the items that you specifically wanted to count, and you still have a number of other items on the worksheet, but you're pretty sure that they're all correct, those were not suspicious, you have no reason to suspect that you need to go through and count those other dozens or hundreds of items. You can use this button to literally set the uncounted number to the expected quantity. Now, this is going to ask for a password. The password is your user password for logging into Director. Set uncounted items quantity to expected quantity. And we see that we have one item where we were expecting 4 by the snapshot, and we had not counted any. So it has now set the floor count to 4. You'll also notice that this marks all items as counted, but it does not mark them as scanned. One important thing to remember to watch for any problems you may be having with cycle counts being finished very quickly and rarely being off in stores where you know there's a variance. If you look at the cycle count worksheet and you see that the items are counted and the count number is in floor count, not in user adjust, but it is not marked as scanned, then you know that they used this button for set uncounted to expected quantity. The only way to have a floor count and not scan the item is to use this button, set uncounted to expected quantity. So that lets you know at a glance if there are items that they didn't count. They simply use the button. So once we've done that, we see that our new total variance is negative $3.23. So that is for this item that I counted -2 of on the shelf. Now, realistically, there's probably not a time when we would have -2 as our actual count. I'm having trouble thinking of any scenario where I would want my worksheet to reflect an actual number on the shelf of -2. So let's pretend our variance was in the other direction. Let's pretend our user address count was 4. We found 4 of that item on the shelf when we were expecting 2. So our variance count is now +2. We have an extra $1.62 of these items in inventory. And that's what's reflected at the top of our total variance. So now we see that there are 0 uncounted items because we set all the uncounted to the expected quantity. We see that there is only 1 item with a variance, and our total variance amount for the whole cycle count was $1.62. This is probably a lot more realistic cycle count for the outcome of our small count. Because we specifically defined a high-risk area, we're going to see some variation because it's probably also a high-traffic area for our cashiers. So it's not uncommon for a cycle count to show a variance of -2 on this item one week and +2 on this item the next week when they found them, when those sticks that were hidden on the shelf behind some other box turned up and got put back where they were supposed to be and got counted correctly. Continuing at the bottom, we have a quick find. If you're dealing with a very long list of items, you can use this to search by description or UPC for a specific item, such as when you're doing a full store count. So if you were expecting to see something show up here with a variance, but you sort by your variance count and you still can't find it, rather than pouring through your entire list, you can use this quick find. As in every module in Director, there is a print button. If we do a print report of a cycle count worksheet, we're going to see, in this case, just our items with variance. Because I had only show variance items checked. We're also seeing this as a hybrid report, which is why there was one line that was in bold on our worksheet. That represents a purchase unit where the subunit was the item with the variance. So it's giving us both the individual and the roll-up lines on our hybrid report. Other choices for report types. Detailed report gives us all the information that you see on your worksheet. A roll-up report gives it to us in the roll-up view that we looked at earlier with the filters on the top. Hybrid report is our default. Hybrid report with quantity sold lets us know if the adjusted total count and adjusted snapshot count do not match the number counted in your floor count. You can quickly see why using a hybrid report with quantity sold. For example, if you counted 5 with your handheld, but your adjusted snapshot count says 3, normally your variance count would probably say 2. But if those sales happened after you counted, your variance count may still be 0 because your adjusted total count, instead of 5 for your floor count, is adjusting for quantity sold as well and is also 3, giving you a variance count of 0. If you do a hybrid report with quantity sold, you can see why 3 and 5 actually give you a variance of 0 because of the quantity sold. Hybrid report sorted by variance is exactly that. It gives you the default hybrid report, but with all your variance items sorted to the top or bottom. There is a custom hybrid report that I do not have set up on this machine. It was for a specific customer's needs that they had us develop. Scan order lets you print the report literally in the order that the items were scanned based on timestamp. And then worksheet. Printing a worksheet report will give you a printed version of exactly what we're looking at here. Again, any of these can be filtered to only show variance items by checking this checkbox. The checkbox is checked by default. This allows you to see a much shorter report of exactly what changed in your inventory due to the cycle count. There is a section where you can add notes for specific variances and reasons for those variances if they were accounted for internally. You can also add notes to talk about how long it took you to do the cycle count if there are any questions about large differences in your adjusted total counts. Notes is just a great general section on most of our worksheets for accounting purposes, for letting your management know what happened if something was out of the ordinary, or just for labeling that this was Wednesday's count for every Wednesday. There is a reviewed checkbox. This literally flags that the cycle count was reviewed. This would typically be used by a manager who's going in afterwards and reviewing the worksheet, just to verify at a glance that someone did look at it again before applying it with save and reconcile. On the far right, we have our refresh quantity sold button. We touched on that a little bit. Let's talk about it again. When we use the refresh quantity sold button, we are literally updating this quantity sold field, and that affects math in the rest of the sheet. When the quantity sold field changes, the breakdown quantity may also change if a breakdown occurred. The adjusted total count will change because your total count plus any new item sold is going to give you an adjusted total count. If you counted 5 and you sold one later, your adjusted total count should be 4. Snapshot quantity is going to be the same. That was your quantity at the time that you started the report. The adjusted snapshot quantity, that's going to change. That's going to adjust for quantity sold. It will be your snapshot quantity minus any sales during your cycle count. And your variance count is going to compare your new adjusted total count to your new adjusted snapshot count. Now, in most cases, hitting refresh quantity sold is not going to change your variance count because both of those numbers should update the same amount. If you sold 1 from 4, the new adjusted total count would be 3. The new adjusted snapshot count would also be 3. Your variance should still be 0. But refreshing quantity sold guarantees that the new values for your adjusted total count are what's being applied to inventory. So before you save and reconcile, it's a good idea to always hit refresh quantity sold. Your variance count shouldn't change, but it will affect what adjusted total count is being put in on each of those items. So when we hit save and reconcile, the last button, it's going to do literally that. It's going to save the cycle count worksheet, and it's going to reconcile this adjusted total count against each of these UPCs for the inventory of that store. For this item where my snapshot, where did we go? There we go. For this item where our snapshot quantity was 2, but our adjusted total count is 4, when you hit save and reconcile, it is going to change the inventory quantity on hand of this item to 4 to our adjusted total count. And if you were to look through the item details, item analysis for that item later, you would see this cycle count, and you would see that this cycle count added a variance of 2 to that item. We're going to save and reconcile. Refresh quantity sold, save and reconcile. Reconcile inventory, apply these counts to inventory. Yes. Inventory has been reconciled. That takes us out of the worksheet and back to our cycle count list in Director. If we refresh our list, we see that it now has a finish date, it is marked finished, and it has been reviewed because we checked that reviewed checkbox. For our item where we had a variance, if we were to go to price book and look up that item, first, we would see that in our secondary tree information, that is one of our items that we've added report group to BM Easy Read shelf, and that's why it showed up on our definition. We would see that our current on-hand quantity is now 4, and if we looked at the item analysis for this item, we would see that it appeared on a cycle count today, where the count was 4, the expected quantity was 2. And we would see in our adjustments that that adjusted in a quantity of 2 from a cycle count. So if you're ever reviewing changes that happen due to a cycle count, this is how those will look on the individual items. All right, that was Cycle Counts 101. If you have any questions, let us know. That concludes this webinar.